Good morning and welcome to your daily sit rep for Friday, the 3rd of October, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Lots to get to today. Robert, good morning. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway here, focusing on these federal layoffs.
So yesterday, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that federal layoffs are likely going to be in the thousands, and the White House is currently looking at agencies that she said do not align with the Trump administration's values for possible cuts. I'm still waiting to see what the result of that Russell Vought and President Trump meeting. I'm still waiting the results of that meeting that happened yesterday. So far, I've not seen anything come out of it as far as which agencies are going to be targeted.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Robert, real quick. I remember back during the transition where the incoming Trump administration was talking about downsizing the federal government. They're going to fire so many workers. And you and I had a brief discussion because I said, this is slightly reminiscent of Paul Bremer, who in 2003 and beyond was the head of the Coalition Provisional Government. I think it was what it was called at the time in Iraq. And they came in and they said, well, we have all these Baathists. That was the Ba'ath parties of the political party. Well, if you call it that, the party of Saddam Hussein. And he said, well, there's so many Baathists left in the Iraqi army, and we don't want a coup, and we don't want pro-Saddam elements causing problems for us. So let's just fire like 70 or whatever, 80% of the Iraqi army, get rid of all these Baathists. And then a short while later, you had all these guys who were out of work, and they were angry and resentful, and they didn't have money to feed their family. And then you had an insurgency on your hands. So I'm not necessarily equating this, but it is somewhat reminiscent. I think at the time, I didn't have a good read, but I think you and I both agreed that the people being let go from the State Department and the action arms overseas, especially like the protests and the color revolution people, it may be better for them to be out of government and still working in government, but still a problem. And it seems like that's probably continuing to be the case, correct?
Correct. I think that's where that Democracy AID group came from, that's made up of former USAID officials and employees that were involved in the color revolution actions overseas.
Mm-hmm. All right. So lots of those folks running loose. All right. And by the way, every federal employee that is let go for, I don't know, it's kind of an envious situation here. You obviously don't want those people working in the Trump administration. You may also not want to give them a reason to be angry with you once they get out, but I don't know. Some things are unavoidable, I guess. All right, let's move over to an update on this government shutdown.
So Senate Majority Leader John Thune said yesterday that the Senate is going to wait until Monday to vote to stop this government shutdown if the vote that's scheduled today on that House stopgap bill fails. So I think this is another pressure point on Democrats to they still need 5 Democrats to cross the aisle to end the shutdown. But I think it's right now most likely to last until at least Monday because the Senate Democrats, especially Chuck Schumer, are under major pressure from activists within the Democratic Party or Democratic coalition to keep the shutdown going until they get those Obamacare subsidies. And from what I understand, Chuck Schumer is coordinating his shutdown strategy with these groups.
Mm-hmm. All right. Please go on.
And moving over to the domestic side, according to a national level Republican official, President Trump warned state Republicans in New Hampshire and Indiana that he's going to support their primary opponents in the upcoming midterm election if they continue resisting passing these new mid-decade congressional maps. And apparently, according to this national Republican official, he said, quote, the base is onto this. And if you are a Republican perceived to be in the way of Republicans, there could very well be consequences. And that means supporting getting some of these Republicans out of office, according to the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. And then yesterday, Apple announced that it is going to remove ICE Block and some other ICE tracking apps that anti-ICE groups have been using to track ICE operations from their app store. And this is after Attorney General Pam Bondi said that she reached out to them yesterday and demanding them remove these apps from their store. And then yesterday, in the Los Angeles Fire Department is currently working to contain a massive fire that broke out yesterday at Chevron's El Segundo, California refinery. Chevron did say that all their employees and contractors are accounted for. There's no injuries. But there's also no reports yet on how much damage was caused. And according to Chevron, this refinery processes about 290,000 barrels of oil per day, which I think would be, if they're, depending on the damage, a major oil refining capacity hit for California. And this is on top of Valero and Phillips 66 planning to close their own refineries over the next year. We've reported on earlier this year, which those two refineries alone account for almost 20% of California's refining capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you've been covering this for a while. Basically, California Governor Gavin Newsom was kind of scrambling to block the shutdown of some of these refineries, which he previously supported, and then he realized they're going to have a gas crisis in California if they do, and now didn't he pretty much 180 on that?
Yeah, and from what I understand, he's still struggling to get these shutdowns stopped. And because right now, I think California's projected to hit like $8 a gallon gas. And he was warned by officials from states around, or at least other states in the West and Southwest, that this was going to cause market disruptions across the Western United States and the Southwest, because now they would be losing a major amount of oil refining capacity. Mm-hmm. And I guess he did the 180 very recently.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Californians got what they voted for, award again. All right, let's go ahead and move on to this Ukrainian gun smuggler.
So the Department of Justice announced that it's seeking to denaturalize a Ukrainian native named Vladimir Volgayev. And they said he lied on his citizenship application in 2016. He was actually granted citizenship in 2016. And he lied about his involvement in a criminal conspiracy to smuggle firearms components out of the U.S. to Ukraine and Italy. And he also defrauded the federal government to gain federal housing benefits. And according to this press release from the DOJ, this is the 11th denaturalization they filed since 20 January. So not very many on the denaturalization front yet. Mm-hmm. And then finally, yesterday, or sometime this week, this group called the International Anti-Fascist Defense Fund said closed down their donations. They said they're no longer accepting donations due to the Trump administration's domestic terrorist organization label of Antifa and related groups. And they said this move is intended to protect their donors. And I think this is the intended effect of that designation, that proclamation put out by Trump last week, because we reported on that on some of the Antifa affinity group responses. And they acknowledge that these types of legal moves, they may not stick, like the domestic terrorism sentencing modifiers or RICO charges, but they were worried that this would disrupt the demonstrator to direct action pipeline by deterring recruitment. And I think that's the intended effect of this. And we're starting to see probably the early signs of it succeeding.
Mm-hmm. You know, it seems like there's probably some regulatory or compliance risk if you're a bank as well, and you have the money that is being donated to the domestic terrorist organization designation is not, it's not a legal designation. It is a more or less a characterization. I mean, Robert, is that how you would explain it?
Correct.
Yeah, because there is no actual domestic terrorist organization designation yet. But yeah, it sure seems like, I mean, if they can't keep weed money in states where weed is more or less legal, how in the world can they continue doing banking business with these groups who are taking money for the purposes of activity classified as domestic terrorism? Sure beats me. It sure seems like there's a lot of leverage points that could be taken here that we have seen taken against conservatives, like actual economic warfare. Debanking is economic warfare. It sure seems like there's a lot more that could be done here.
Yeah, and I think first off, the banks after the post 9/11 banking laws have become so paranoid, basically, of getting dinged for any activities like this, that they might just do this preemptively before any laws passed to create that domestic terrorist organization designation. And then there's also an angle the Trump administration could take. They could start sending letters through these regulatory agencies to the banks saying that this group or individual, after an arrest or investigation, is what's called a politically exposed person. And that's what the Biden administration had done to debank a lot of groups in the previous administration.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, just a quick question. I do want to cover this. So BV says, why be as or more evil than them? Well, I wouldn't characterize this as evil. This is we're in a low intensity conflict, and one side is going, well, typically really nobody wins in low intensity conflict. They tend to be destructive, but one side is going to defeat the other in a low intensity conflict eventually. And you just have to ask yourself, which side do you want winning and which side do you want losing? Open shut case. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. And let's go ahead and move on to our global sit rep. Jared, good morning.
Morning. So we're going to start off in France along with Russia and China. So we discussed the French conducting a boarding operation yesterday on a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker, and that tanker had a Chinese captain and Chinese first mate, and both were placed under detention for refusing to comply with French authorities. They wouldn't say who they were, where they were from, what they were doing, just that they were the captain and first mate of the ship. The captain is actually going to be retained. The first mate was released, but the captain will be retained and then sent through the courts in France starting in February. And President Putin of Russia actually had a pretty interesting response to this. He called it piracy and asked, "How do you deal with pirates? You destroy them." That's a quote from him. He did say that doesn't mean that they're going to immediately start a war over this, but that this does increase the risk of confrontation because you're intercepting a ship here that's ours. He's not wrong. But nevertheless, it is violating sanctions, and the ship was reportedly heading to India with a load of cargo. So should be plenty of fallout from that. I just haven't seen any pop up yet, except from Putin there. Over in Israel, the Israel Defense Forces have secured basically all exits to Gaza except for one. Now, the defense minister of Israel Katz, he said that this is the last chance for Gaza residents to move southward and leave Hamas terrorists isolated, his words. Now, he did add a warning that any who remain and do not get out will be treated as terrorists and terror supporters. So, I mean, based on what we've seen out of the Israeli engagements, that pretty much means arrest if you surrender and kill if you don't. There's a lot of people there to still move out, and I think I think based on Israel's actions, we're going to see a pretty significant escalation here. But this is a pressure campaign to get Hamas to accept the peace deal because Israel is required to immediately cease all actions if both sides accept. And on that note, Egypt is working with Hamas to accept that peace deal. They're pressuring them to do so. The Egyptian foreign minister did say that if Hamas rejects it, that's going to make the regional situation extremely difficult. He did say that Egypt is not going to allow the displacement of Gaza's residents under any circumstances. Another national security concern we've covered for Egypt. I think this all points towards what I said when we covered it. I think that this is a last ditch effort before the Arabs get involved here. And then over in Japan and Taiwan, they conducted their second Coast Guard joint patrol, basically, down in the southernmost islands of Japan. And the first one they did was actually July of last year. But I think it's notable, they did this in an area where the Chinese Coast Guard, Japan's reported, they have a near permanent presence there. So they did this in front of the Chinese in disputed islands. And the picture actually on here, I think it's very important to note, that was in this same spot just 13 years ago, where they were exchanging water cannon fire to try to dispel each other over these islands. There has been a rapid shift toward working together due to a common external threat.
All right. Thanks for that, Jared. And coming up this weekend with 374 protests right around the baseline. Before we move on, I'm not going to make it a practice to get into a debate with the comment section. However, I do want to address this. And BV says using economic warfare, where we should use de-escalation because we are quite literally always stronger in all terms, is the goal here, or rather, it should be the goal. Well, BV, I don't know, and I'm not trying to condescend to you, okay? But let's go back to 2015 when that was Antifa's, that's when they started to rise to prominence back in 2015. And I know, and they've been around for a long time. I know they have. And you go back to the Battle of Seattle, kind of Antifa 1.0 back in the 1990s and 1999 was the Seattle, the big riot out there for the G7 or whatever conference it was. I don't know if you've noticed, but their whole thing is escalation into a revolutionary rupture. And they did a really good job of that from 2015 into 2021. The riots and stuff, in some of the cities, yes, they did end in 2020, but in some places, the rioting and the lawlessness and the violence continued well into 2021. At some point, you just have to admit and be intellectually honest that this is not just routine politics. Antifa is not just a routine, good faith political actor. They are literally a revolutionary group who wants to violently overthrow the government. So this is not something where you try to escalate and make peace. They don't make peace. They're like the Borg. They keep coming after you. All right, Star Trek reference. And maybe not a good analogy, but they're like a cancer, and they will just keep growing. And you don't make peace with cancer. You don't just say, "Oh, cancer, why don't you just stay over here and you can have your little cancer area and leave the rest of us alone." It's not going to happen. It doesn't work like that. So we are in a conflict that is going to be won by one side or the other, and the question really is, which side do you want to win? Not only that, but I get this whole thing. Trust me, I get it. You don't want to establish precedents for yourself that can be used against you later. Again, I don't know where anyone's been for the past 4 years, but this whole thing's out the window. The other side is going to use precedents to expand their power. They've done it. They've been doing it since, you go back to January 2009, and both sides do it. And I agree, both political parties are absolutely atrocious for the most part. And unfortunately, there's very little common ground. You're not going to de-escalate your way. The only way you're de-escalating your way out of this is into defeat. The other side is not going to de-escalate. And I'm not talking about conventional conflict or civil war here. I'm talking about political warfare and winning in politics. And that is something that Republicans have been very bad at for a long time. And now all of a sudden, like, Trump is being decently good at it. And Democrats don't like that. And it's a bitter pill to swallow, but they're just going to have to take their medicine. So, I think it's just pick your poison at this point. All right, with that, let's go ahead and move on to our early warning agenda. I'm going to talk a bit about, I think, the three things that the Trump administration really needs to focus on to get out ahead of on this burgeoning color revolution. There are three things that should be top of mind. I'm going to tell you exactly what they are. Basically, in a counter-revolution capacity. We're going to talk about some other stuff as well on the Homeland Operations side. And, it was the World Trade Organization meeting. It wasn't the G7. It was the WTO in Seattle. Thank you, Lamont. There's one other thing that I did want to mention. There was a question here about some guy said, member said, he can't find the live stream on the app. I sent a bunch of messages on that platform, sent out a bunch of emails. We have moved over to forwardobserver.com. If you cannot access the live stream over on the app, send me an email or get in touch with our support email. We will get you squared away. You have a new account. It's over on the new website. We moved a few months ago. All right, with that, everyone, it's not too late to jump over to the high side and join us for the rest of the early warning briefing. Head over to forwardobserver.com/trial. Start a free 7-day trial and join us for the rest. All right, with that, Jared, please take us out. Early warning, folks, please stand by.